They have spent decades searching for the truth. But tonight, patients who contracted hepatitis C and HIV from contaminated blood have condemned the inquiry into the scandal as no more than a whitewash. The investigation concluded few matters could have been done differently. It did make one single recommendation, that anyone who had a blood transfusion before 1991 should be tested for hepatitis C. After its publication, the UK and Scottish governments apologised to those infected and to the families of those who have died. Our chief reporter David Cowan has the story.
Well, this inquiry was ordered by the Scottish Government back in 2007 after 6 years of work and £12 million. This is the result. A final report covering 1,800 pages. Its chief conclusion can be boiled down to this, that very little should or could have been done differently at the time, that the infection of 3,000 people with hepatitis C and 80 with HIV couldn't have been avoided. That, of course, has angered relatives and victims who heard the report's findings announced today. People infected with HIV and hepatitis C had joined relatives of people who haven't lived to see this day. A minute's silence was held for those who died after the NHS infected them with deadly viruses. The judge, Lord Penrose, is seriously ill in hospital. His findings were read by the inquiry secretary.
Some commentators believe that more could have been done to prevent infection in particular groups of patients. Careful consideration of the evidence has, however, revealed few aspects in which matters should, or more importantly could, have been handled differently.
When the judge's words expressed sympathy for what he called the forgotten suffering of clinical staff, the anger began to boil over. Afterwards, the charity Haemophilia Scotland had to appeal for CAM. Lord Penrose's name was removed from the lectern.
It might appear, on first reading, to be, as many of you have said, a whitewash, with frankly some of the chairman's assertions seemingly barely rational.
But he said the report laid out in detail what had happened, and they had to use that story to get action from politicians.
We owe it to all of those who have died and those whose lives have been turned upside down and continue to be every day of life.
For the first time, the report revealed that 2,500 people in Scotland were infected with hepatitis C through blood transfusions and nearly 500 through blood products. Almost 80 acquired HIV. Andy Gunn was 7 when he was infected with the virus that leads to AIDS.
Well, the health ministers in Canada, France and Japan, they got sent to jail for their part in it. But here they've got away scot-free, and this report is just it's just a waste of time, really, yeah.
The principal demand was for an apology and a new compensation scheme for victims and their families.
We need the Scottish Government to immediately declare that they're prepared to set up a compensation scheme that will fully provide redress to every victim of this tragedy.
From London and Edinburgh, those apologies came, along with promises of better support.
And to each and every one of those people, I would like to say sorry on behalf of the government for something that should not have happened.
I think it's fair to say that the arrangements are not working well and are not supporting people in the way that they need to support them. So we've agreed that we'll take that forward initially anyway on a UK basis.
Lord Penrose did criticise the use of blood donated by prisoners in Scottish jails, a practice stopped in 1984, and delays in introducing a test for screening donated blood for hepatitis C in the early 90s. The Blood Transfusion Service has admitted that had that test been brought in earlier, huge numbers of people could have escaped infection.
Are we talking about dozens or hundreds? Do we have any idea?
I would have thought it would be at least in the order of hundreds, but I would stress that that's a guess on my part. We're acknowledging that we could have tried harder to do that, and we're apologising for not doing so.
6 years ago, some of the victims said the inquiry wouldn't provide the answers they were looking for. What happens next will determine whether they'll be let down again.